The night is quiet, not dead silent. There's the soft groan of wind curling through wooden rafters, the uneven creak of carts being pulled home just a little too late, and the faintest trace of incense still lingering in the air like a ghost, with no rush to leave. You open your eyes, slowly, not in your bed, but on a worn reed mat inside a modest room of rough stone and uneven light. You're not alone. Outside, the winter moon is painting the snow-covered rooftops with that old silver brush it saves for nights like these. You are in ancient China, in the Han Dynasty, in a small provincial outpost near the edge of the empire. Not much happens here, and that's exactly the point. You're not some general or noble. You're a bureaucrat's assistant, just important enough to have dry hands. Not so important you'd be missed. And the year, roughly 100 BCE, maybe T101. Historians still debate whether a particular eclipse was misrecorded or just exaggerated. Either way, you're here and you're warm. There's a soft knock at the door. Not the urgent kind, more like someone who had to walk across a courtyard in sandals and isn't sure if the trip was worth it. You rise, bones slow, and slide open the door. The man standing there has no name worth remembering. You only know him as the one with the nervous sandals. He stammers something about an imperial order. Snow collection. Yes, that's right. Snow, apparently. His Majesty Emperor Wu of Honda, most powerful man in this entire continent, has declared that all fresh snow from the northern provinces must be collected, preserved in clay jars, and shipped south to the capital. Why, that's unclear. The court scroll just says, for consideration and use in the imperial meditation garden, which sounds both poetic and aggressively unhelpful. You sigh. Of course this is happening. Your task then, to oversee the collection, not to question it, but, to be honest, you were hoping for a more meaningful assignment, like cataloguing tax grain before stepping out. You wrap yourself in your thickest robe, the blue one with the frayed cuffs that smells faintly of dried plum. You clutch your lacquered writing box, already filled with thin bamboo slips and dull brushes, and step into the cold. The courtyard crunches beneath your sandals. The snow is fresh, crisp, still falling in wide, slow flakes like a bored orchestra playing a lullaby at the gate. You're met by two locals, hired laborers, who would rather be fermenting millet than helping you bottle the weather. One of them sneezes so forcefully you instinctively flinch. You explain the task, gently, as if trying not to wake a sleeping ox. They nod. They don't ask questions. They know better. You hand them each a jar, simple clay, glazed just enough to avoid seepage. The snow must be packed, gently but firmly, like bedding a nervous cat, and then sealed with wax and a prayer. The imperial seal must be stamped on each jar with your personal ink. Red, of course. The ink smells faintly of cinnamon, though no one knows why. Possibly to discourage insects, possibly to comfort the emperor. As you supervise, snowflakes settle in your hair, and you wonder, is this madness, or is this what stability looks like from too far away? One odd tidbit you remember from a book you once copied. The Han believed that winter snow carried the breath of dragons in slumber. Collecting it, they said, preserved a piece of that peace, though others suspected it was just really fancy water. Storage. You feel the cold creeping through your boots, and can't help but think, you probably won't make it through this day without cursing it ajar. The wind sighs against the stone walls. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crows. Confused? Before we wander further, If you're enjoying this quiet descent into soft confusion, feel free to like this video and subscribe. No trumpet blasts, no sudden intros, just gentle stories told slowly. And if you're listening from somewhere far from ancient China, drop a comment with your location and local time. It's oddly comforting to know how many people are falling asleep in entirely different centuries. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. The workers finish sealing the last of the morning snow. You mark the jars with the Imperial's oddly smug dragon, like it's judging your penmanship. A bell rings from the town square. Time for morning scroll readings. You brace yourself, because nothing quite says state authority like being read to in freezing temperatures by someone who can't pronounce half the names. You join the small gathering outside the local registry hall. The ranking clerks are reciting something about heaven's will and the weather's compliance. You nod solemnly, as if the frostbite in your left toe confirms divine alignment. And there, in the snow-crusted silence, the strangest thought flickers. What if this isn't foolishness? What if, somewhere in the capital, the emperor sits in his silent garden, opening these jars in summer, releasing soft clouds of winter into the scorching air just to feel something forgotten? Of course, he could just be collecting them to brag. At parties, either way, your job continues. One jar at a time. The wind curls tighter now, carrying with it the dry scent of juniper and something faintly sour pickled cabbage. Probably. The street dog that follows you barks once and promptly regrets it. Your day has only begun. By midday, the jars are stacked neatly like sleepy sentinels at the edge of the yard. Each one labeled, sealed, blessed, and if we're being honest, judged slightly by the local priest, who has taken it upon himself to chant over them. He insists it's necessary to prevent snow rot. You have no idea what snow rot is. Neither does he, but he's committed. You return indoors for a cup of lukewarm chrysanthemum tea that tastes faintly like regret and old wood. The teacup is chipped. You like it that wit feels honest across the room. Your fellow assistant is recording the day's events on a bamboo scroll using what must be the world's driest ink. The brush barely makes a mark. You consider suggesting he just whisper the events into a jar and bury it instead. Outside, the snow has paused. The sky turns the color of an unused scroll, off-white, indecisive. You take this moment to step out toward the granary, not because you have to, but because it's warmer than the office. The granary keeper, a square-shaped woman named Auntie. Z, everyone calls her that, even her goat, nods when you enter. She's steaming a batch of rice cakes over a fire that smells like burnt memories. You trade her a scrap of tea brick for one cake and savor it slowly, though it crumbles with the enthusiasm of a failed marriage. Auntie Z tells you something odd as you eat. She remembers her grandfather speaking of the emperor's father, who once ordered all mountain echoes to be mapped, a formal record of where the shouting comes back, supposedly to track how sound travels across provinces, or maybe to see if the echoes could be taxed. No one really knows. You try to imagine. Being in charge of echo collection, it doesn't help your mood. As you bite into the last corner of the cake, a boy runs up from the temple with a scroll. His ears are red and his nose is doing that heroic drip thing. He hands it to you, breathless, a new order. Of course, the snow in today's jars must be sent immediately before sunset. Apparently, the emperor is particularly contemplative today and wishes to observe the jars while sipping from his jade teacup. Your delivery window just shrank from days to hours. You mutter a word that sounds like a blessing, but I is in single quotes T. Quickly. You gather the ox cart teamed to farmers, one slightly stoned mule, and a cart that probably once dreamt of being a real vehicle. The jars are packed with more care than most dowries. You supervise, brush in hand, sealing cracks with pine resin and squinting suspiciously at every bump in the wood. As the cart pulls away, you walk beside it for a while, watching your breath hang in the air like speech you didn't say. The road south curls around the frozen river, flanked by cypress trees that shed no leaves but offer plenty of judgment. An hour in, one jar begins to leak. A faint trickle of snow melt down the side like a slow betrayal. You stop the cart and reseal it, hands trembling from cold and the slow erosion of patience. That's when you spot it. A traveler, watching from the tree line, robes too clean for a farmer, boots too new for a monk. He nods once and vanishes, back into the woods. You blink, then pretend it didn't happen. You resume the walk. The jars are heavy. Your feet are heavier. By the time you reach the checkpoint, the sun is a brass coin sinking into its silk pouch. You hand over the paperwork, multiple slips, each requiring a stamp, a signature, and, for some reason, the name of your childhood pet. The guard doesn't even look at the jars. He just waves you through and wishes you a long life, which feels passive-aggressive. As the cart disappears, toward the courier station, you watch the sky turn indigo. You think about the snow, about how it will reach the capital, be placed in a garden, and slowly, quietly melt. And maybe the emperor will inhale its breath and remember a winter from his youth. Or he'll forget it completely by lunch. Either way, it's done. You return home in the dark. The stars are out, disinterested and mildly condescending. You light a candle. It flickers like it's considering quitting, and before sleep can claim. You note one final, strange entry in your scroll. One jar may have smiled at me. You don't explain it. Some things aren't meant to be clarified. Tomorrow it will snow again. You already feel tired. Morning begins the way all great epics do by, not wanting to get out of bed. Your mat is warmer than expected, and your bones protest the idea of motion with the passive aggression of a cat moved from a sunny spot. Outside, the sky is still deciding whether it's cloudy or just dramatic. You can hear the wet slap of snow being shoveled somewhere, and you silently curse the sun for showing up so late to its own job. You finally rise. The floor is colder than you remember. Your toes whisper insults at you. You dress in layers, not because it's efficient, but because somewhere between the third and fourth robe, you start to feel like a functioning adult. A new scroll waits on your desk. Of course it does. This one is written with alarming neatness, which is always a bad sin. It bears the wax seal of the Office of Harmonious Materials, which sounds lovely until you realize they're the ones who once sent a memo about regulating the emotional temperature of clay. The scroll reads, "By decree of His Divine Grace, additional snow is to be gathered under specific environmental conditions. Flecks must be no larger than a mulberry leaf and must fall without accompanying wind." You stare at the scroll, you reread it, you blink. So now you're collecting well-behaved snow. You go to the window. Outside, snow falls quietly, as if trying not to offend anyone. It's mulberry-sized, it's windless. You sigh, it qualifies you. Gather your box, boots, and quiet despair, and step into the day. At the village edge, you find the same two workers from yesterday. One is chewing on something unidentifiable. The other is making snowballs and muttering to himself like a man. Rehearsing a grudge, you tell them the new requirement. They nod, slowly. One raises an eyebrow. You raise one back. No one says anything. This is now a game of bureaucratic chicken. Then, as if sensing your sarcasm, a local scholar approaches. His name is Wen, but he insists on being called the Quill. You have no idea why. He doesn't write faster than anyone else, but he does carry a spare brush behind his ear like some kind of calligraphy outlaw. He tells you that ancient texts mention emperors using snow to cool the breath of heated words. That's right, snow jars may be the original anger management tool. Who knew? You ask if those emperors were effective rulers. He shrugs and says, well, their courtiers lived long enough to write about them. Wen walks off without offering to help. Classic Quill. You and the workers set up a new collection site near the shrine, where the wind is still and the snow is silently obedient. Each flake lands like a tiny contract. You supervise, you write, you try not to scream into the jars. One of the workers jokes that perhaps the emperor is lonely and just wants something to watch melt. You laugh because the alternative is crying. By afternoon 27, new jars are packed and stamped. You feel oddly proud, like someone who's alphabetized a library no one visits. You sit beneath the awning of the local tea shop, sipping something smoky and bitter. The shopkeeper offers you boiled peanuts, which are inexplicably cold. You eat them anyway. Then a visitor arrives, an envoy from the regional governor, dressed in so many silk layers he looks like a walking curtain. He announces that the emperor's collection has been expanded to include variant snows. You stare, he elaborates. Variant snows refers to first snow, final snow, snow that falls on a rooster's back, snow visible during a sneeze. You ask politely how one documents a sneeze-related snow incident. He replies, very seriously, with vigilance. You look at the sky, you look at your tea, you look at your hands. You have questions. You choose to keep them. That evening, you return home to your mat, sore in places you didn't know you used. Your brush hand is stained red. Your boots are stiff with cold, but the scroll is full. And that, somehow, feels like victory. As you drift to sleep, you imagine the emperor leaning over a jar, peering into the ice like it holds a secret. You wonder if he ever sees his own reflection. The next day begins with thunder, not the sky kind, the political kind. A new edict arrives before breakfast, delivered by a runner with frost in his eyebrows and the 1,000-yard stare of someone who's seen too many scrolls. This one's different, urgent, marked with the red ribbon of level 2 intrigue, which is 2 levels higher than anything you've been trusted with before. You open it slowly, because drama deserves pacing. Notice, a counterfeit jar of imperial snow has been discovered. All jars must now be authenticated by smell. Smell. You reread the line. Surely, you think, that must be symbolic. It is not. The memo continues. True snow should retain a scent of pine, distant incense, and the particular coolness of morning mist. You want to laugh, but your tea is too weak to support that emotion. The workers look at you like you're trying to sell them invisible geese. You explain the smell test. One sniffs a jar, shrugs, and says it smells like regret. You mark that as authentic. Back at the hall, a new character enters. Inspector Lee. He's thin, sharp-nosed, and carries a brush like a weapon. He doesn't smile. Ever. Probably not even as a child. He's been sent to oversee smell conformity, which, if we're being honest, is a job that shouldn't exist. He watches as you inspect each jar. You nod, you sniff. You make up words like undertone and snow bloom. He doesn't flinch. Either he's impressed or clinically unfeeling. Hard to say. During a short break, you chat with Auntie Z again. She tells you, quite casually, that during the Jin dynasty, people used to store snow in silk-lined boxes for use in desert's frozen almond milk, sweet plum wine, and something ominously referred to as cloud jelly. You nod slowly, wondering, how many jars are actually being used for snack prep? Probably more than you'd think. She also tells you that once, long ago, an emperor tried to bottle moonlight. A whole department was formed. Nothing came of it, except several scrolls about celestial logistics. Historians still debate whether that was an art project or a mental breakdown. Meanwhile, Inspector Lee frowns at a jar and declares it too. Confident, he rejects it. The worker sighs and writes too confident on the clay. You wonder if that label would also apply to you. By late afternoon, the smell test is complete. 3 jars are rejected, to pass with compliments. 1 causes sneezing and is declared emotionally ambiguous. You record it all, every mark, every decision. You are the scribe of a frozen empire, the poet of perishable things. As the sun sets, a messenger arrives from the capital. His boots are cracked, and he carries a pouch containing a single strip of silk, dyed deep green. The message is brief. His Majesty was pleased. He watched the snow melt for hours. That's it. No reward, no promise. Just that you sit by the window, watching your breath curl in the air like a soft confession. Outside, the snow begins, a Genjin toll wide, slow. The kind that doesn't care who watches. You close your eyes. You think of the jars, of the Emperor, of snow that has never known war, only warmth. And you wonder, is this what peace looks like? Absurd, fragile, and fleeting. You fall asleep without realizing it, head resting on a pile of bamboo slips. 1 jar rolls slightly in its crate, just enough to whisper. You wake up with a scroll imprint on your cheek. It's not your best look, but no one here is judging. The sun, meanwhile, is being lazy again, hiding behind a pale grey veil, like it's nursing its own hangover. You stretch. Something in your back protests loudly, like a forgotten door hinge. The mat is colder this morning, or maybe you're just more tired. Your boots resist going anonymously. At this point, they might be trying to unionize. There's already a knock at the door. This time, it's not a summons. It's Wen the Quill. He enters uninvited and unbothered, holding a bamboo case. I brought something, he says, as if this is a normal thing he does. Inside the case are fragments of a scroll, brittle and brown, written in characters old enough to need translation. He believes they contain a recipe for snow longevity. You blink, he explains, apparently. During the Zhou dynasty, alchemists were obsessed with preserving snow not for beauty, but to mix it with powdered cinnabar and lengthen the breath, whatever that means. Also, possibly, to keep wine cool when has been working on a revival of snow techniques. Not wine. That would have made more sense. You look at the faded writing. Something about 3 breaths of moonlight, glaze of the northern river, and don't. Anger, the snow. Poetic, vague, and completely useless. Still, you're intrigued. And sleepy, the 2 of you step outside. The snow is falling again, soft and steady, like a lullaby humming in reverse. The town is quiet. Even the chickens seem contemplative. when wants to try an experiment. He's brought 3 new jars lined with a silk he swears was boiled in mulberry ash. You watch as he places fresh snow inside, then whispers a charm that sounds suspiciously like he's making it up. You don't interrupt. It's that kind of morning. Later, you visit the post courier station. The overseer, their master Louis, half asleep behind his desk, surrounded by unopened scrolls and a sleepy cat who may or may not be his assistant. You hand him your delivery log. He groans without looking up. Another snow day, he mutters. You nod. Another 20 jars. He waves you off. The cat stretches in sympathy. On your way back, you detour through the market. It's thin to date, too cold for bargaining. One vendor is selling emperor-approved snow containers, which are clearly just repurposed fish jars. Another claims to have a leak-proof snow satchel made of pigskin and optimism. You don't buy anything. You're not made of jade. At the noodle stall, the cook hands you a bowl without asking. He knows your routine. Thick noodles, hot broth, mystery greens. You eat slowly, steam rising from the bowl and fogging your vision. It smells like pepper and dreams. A man next to you begins talking about weather patterns. You nod politely while thinking about your bed. He mentions that in a province to the west, the emperor once ordered a snowfall weighed, every flake, every drift, by hand. The records took 4 years to complete and were eventually eaten by goats. Historians still debate whether this was a metaphor or a scheduling error. You finish your noodles. The bowl is warm in your hands. You close your eyes for a moment longer than usual. Later, you find Wen in the temple garden, meditating near his jars. One is sweating. Another is completely dry. The third is steaming slightly. You raise an eyebrow. Wen shrugs. Might be divine approval, he says. Or it might be a misfired jar left near the brazier. You don't press as evening draws in. The sky darkens with that particular shade of blue that only appears when the day is done pretending. The town quiets again, slipping into its slow rhythm of sleep and firelight. You return to your room. Write a single line in your log. Today, a jar tried to exhale. You don't explain it. That would ruin it. You sleep deeply. A snowflake lands on your window and stays there. Just for a moment. The morning greets you with news. The Emperor's garden has reached optimal drift formation, and the Bureau of Seasonal Harmony has issued a formal thank you to all contributors. You receive a paper ribbon with your name written in gold. It's entirely ceremonial, but you pin it to the wall anyway. It flutters slightly whenever the wind sneaks in through the cracks. You find that oddly comforting. Auntie Z brings you a parcel. Inside is a jar. Not one of yours. This one is. Older. It bears the symbol of a previous reign. The lacquer has faded. The seal cracked. She tells you her uncle used to work in the palace kitchens. He once smuggled this jar home after a banquet, believing it held leftover rice wine. Instead, he found snow, pure, dry, and untouched after 3 days. He assumed it was cursed and kept it sealed ever since. You open it. The inside smells faintly of pine and something like forgotten rain. You record it, seal it again, and mark the jar as possessing unresolved dignity. Later that day, you're summoned to the administrative hall. Inspector Lee is thereof. Course, so is Wen, and surprise a minor official from the imperial court. He's small, round, and blinks like someone recently hit by poetry. He informs you that the Emperor has taken a sudden interest in the personalities of snow. You wait for the punchline. There isn't one. Apparently. some jars have been described as noble, others as timid, and one was declared vengeful but restrained. His Majesty now wishes these impressions documented. So now you're a snow psychologist. The next hours are spent walking among your collection, tapping each jar, whispering gently, and noting their emotional posture. You invent terms like flake anxiety and core melancholy, when helps by playing a zither in the background. Inspector Lee does not approve. He says the music is too interpretive. One jar hums when touched. You pretend not to notice. Outside, the snow has paused again. The streets are wet, and the sky is taking a long nap behind the clouds. You take a break by the pond, now frozen over. Children are sliding across it on flat wood boards. One nearly collides with a goose, who refuses to yield. A local storyteller begins reciting a tale about a Tang dynasty princess who bottled her laughter in jars. The story has no ending. That's the whole point. Historians still debate whether she was real or just a metaphor for noise control in court. The sun slips lower. You light a lantern and make your way home. In your journal, you write, some jars hold snow, others hold moments. One might hold me, eventually. You sleep without dreams, wrapped in blankets that smell faintly of plum smoke, and in the stillness of your room, a jar ticks. You wake up to wind, not the playful kind that flirts with curtains and hums under doors. No, this wind is serious. It whistles like it's lost something and blames you personally. The snow has turned crusty, hardened in the night, like it too has had enough of your nonsense. You sip your morning tea with both hands, staring at your paper ribbon of appreciation hanging sideways on the wall. It flaps once and gives up. Outside, the town is all hunched shoulders and red noses. The temple bell rings twice, not a ceremony, just someone bored and cold. Today's assignment is a little different. A new order arrived at dawn. The Emperor wants snow from transitional spaces. You reread the phrase like it might grow a second meaning. But no, the directive is clear. Collect snow from places that are neither here nor there. Gateways, bridges, courtyards between buildings. Metaphors with architecture. You grab your lacquered box, a fresh set of clay jars, and your lowest expectations. Your first stop is the stone bridge at the center of town. It arches modestly over a frozen stream and smells faintly of wet moss and overheard secrets. Two boys are skating on the ice below, using bits of roof tile as blades. One of them waves. You wave back. You crouch on the bridge's crest and scoop a handful of snow. It feels oddly heavier, like it's seen more. You pack it gently into the jar, seal it, and label it Bridge 1. Holds grudges. Next, the alleyway between the shrine and the silversmith's house. You've walked past it 100 times, but never noticed how quiet it is. The snow here is soft, slightly yellowed from lantern light, and smells faintly of smoke. You fill another jar and mark it Ali too. Suspicious warmth when joins you with his own jars. He's found a patch of snow beneath a half-collapsed awning and claims it feels philosophical. You don't ask him to explain. You don't want to know. You both move toward the town gates, where the snow is blown in from the wilds beyond. This, when argues, is threshold snow. You nod slowly, writing it down like you agree. At the edge of the gates, you spot something unusual, a single jar resting on its side, half buried. It doesn't belong to either of you. You dig it out. The seal is imperial, but older 3 reigns ago. Inside, the snow has turned to a murky, amber-colored slush. You sniff it. It smells like ginger and disappointment, when suggests it may have been part of an abandoned experiment. You wonder if the emperor ever forgets his jars the way people forget names in a crowded room. You mark the jar. Ghost sample. Auntie Z appears from nowhere and hands you each a dumpling. No words, just dumplings. You eat gratefully. It tastes like leek and sympathy. She tells you that when she was young, snow was collected and used to cool ceremonial tea served during morning rituals. The colder the tea, the deeper the grief, they said. You nod. You understand. Some snow stays cold longer than it should. That night, you record the day's findings. Transitional snow appears confused, likely to overthink things, possibly sentient. Inspector Lee reviews your notes and sighs audibly. You're enjoying this too much, he mutters. You reply, someone has to. You sleep restlessly. In your dreams, jars float in the air, whispering, in a language that sounds like dripping water. One of them says your name. You wake to tapping. Not thunder, not wind, just a steady, deliberate tapping at the window. It's the goose, the same one from the pond. It stares at you like it knows something about your past and isn't impressed. You open the window. It honked once and walks away. No message, no scroll, just judgment. Outside, the town is wrapped in a dull fog. Snow still falls, but reluctantly, like it's been asked to do over time. Today's task, music jars. Yes, music. Someone at the palace burr, perhaps the emperor himself, has suggested that snow collected during musical performances may resonate with harmonies of the soul. You've long given up asking why when he's already at the temple, tuning a gukin. 3 others have joined him, one with a bamboo flute, another with a zither, and a woman with a clay drum that thuds like polite thunder. You set up the jars in a semicircle, as instructed. The musicians begin. The snow falls more evenly here, thick and measured, as if drawn by the rhythm. You scoop gently, respectfully, as the music plays. Each jar is filled between notes, like catching echoes. You label them based on what you hear. Jar 1, minor key, major mood. Jar 2, resonates with regret. Jar 3, slightly flat. Still noble. Inspector Lee watches from the back, unimpressed, chewing on a boiled root. He mutters something about subjective snow being a logistical nightmare. You ignore him when plays a particularly slow piece that sounds like someone apologizing without using words. The snow during this section falls in larger flakes, almost lazily. You swear one lands and doesn't melt for a full minute. A local girl begins dancing in the square. Her steps are small and certain, feet barely lifting off the ground. The snow follows her like a shy friend. You pack 3 more jars. These you don't label. You just sit with them, wondering if maybe some things don't need explanations. Later, you find Auntie Z watching from her doorway. She offers no story this time, just a quiet smile. Back at the registry, you record everything. You use poetry instead of standard notation. Inspector Lee objects. You don't change it. Jar 7 sounds like late morning tea and a name you once forgot, but never stopped missing. Before sleep, you place 1 jar near your bed, just to see what dreams it brings. It hums faintly. Not a sound you can hear, but a sound you can feel. Outside, the goose is still watching. You wake up warm, suspiciously warm. The jar by your bed has fogged slightly, and the scent in the room has shifted pine, wax, maybe even citrus. You sit up slowly, half expecting the snow inside to be gone. It hasn't melted, but it looks calmer somehow. You don't mention it. Not out loud. Outside, there's no snow falling. Just grey sky and a kind of hush that only arrives when weather holds its breath. You stretch, crack your knuckles, and find a new scroll waiting at your door. It's thin, written with a lighter ink, as if whispered onto the paper. Today's directive: collect snow from moments of silence. You read it twice, hoping for clarification. There is none. Only a poem scrawled in the margin. Between the bell's toll and its echo, there is a space. Collect that. Of course, you meet when outside. He's already got his brush and jars in hand, clearly thrilled. Silent snow, he says, finally. You start at the temple bell, after the noon gong. The courtyard hangs in perfect stillness for just a breath before people resume talking, coughing, sweeping. That space, the breath, it counts. You scoop the snow during that pause. It's colder than expected. Dry, slightly crystalline. You mark the jar. Bell 12:01 held its breath. You walk together through the town, waiting for silence. Outside the bakery, there's a hush between customers. One man stares at the rising steam of his bun like it owes him an explanation. Another jar, bread pours. At the old scholar's bench, a page-turning moment. Crisp silence before he begins reading aloud again. You scoop it. Wisdom gap. You pause at the cemetery. No one's there. Not a sound, just wind among headstones and a crow in no particular hurry. The snow here is still, untouched. You fill one more jar, quietly. No label this time, just a nod. Back at the hall, Inspector Lee is reading reports with his usual disdain. You place your jars gently on the shelf. He barely glances at them. Is that one labeled bread? You nod. Silence bread. He sighs. You're exhausting. You take that as a compliment. Auntie Z passes you a candied yam on your walk home. Today is a ghost day, she says. Best not to whistle. You nod and chew slowly. The yam is sticky, sweet, and oddly reassuring. At dusk, a boy runs up with a broken jar. He tripped. The snow is gone. He looks devastated. You kneel beside him, smile, and say, "Some snow was never meant to stay." He stares, then nods like you've just told him something he'll remember forever, even if it makes no sense. You record the broken jar in your log. Silence lost. Probably intentional. You fall asleep early, listening for snow that no longer falls. The jar by your bed no longer hums. It simply exists. And that, somehow, is enough. Today begins with a riddle and 3 chickens. The riddle comes from Wen, who claims a dream told him that the snow of laughter weighs less. The chickens, meanwhile, are just in the way. You step outside into pale sunlight. Still no new snow, but old snow clings stubbornly to rooftops, like guests who refuse to leave the party even as the fire dies out. A scroll arrives before breakfast, handed to you by a courier with wind-burned cheeks and too much energy for this hour. You open it slowly. Inside, request. Snow influenced by joy. Right, because that's measurable. The note also includes a suggestion. Attend community events, celebrations, weddings if possible. Gather from locations touched by laughter. You sigh, then stretch, then pack extra jars. You already know this will be absurd. First stop, the noodle stall. The cook is telling a story about how he once mistook a snow-covered cat for a dumpling. The customers are wheezing. You gather some snow from beneath the bench. Label. feline misidentification. At the schoolhouse, a group of children are playing a game involving snowballs, shouting, and no apparent rules. One child tries to make a snow angel with such enthusiasm that they get stuck. The laughter is pure and uncontaminated. You take a sample from just beside the chaos. Laughter radius, but then the wedding. It's small, local, and very loud. The bride throws rice, the groom drops it, and someone's uncle starts singing the wrong song. Everyone laughs until they cry. You collect a jarful from the threshold of the ceremonial platform. It's pinkish from scattered petals. Label matrimonial oops. When insists on collecting his own samples from the food table. He claims dumpling joy is just as potent as romantic joy. You let him have this one. Back at the registry, Inspector Lee refuses to believe in joy-based jars. He actually says the words, "Laughter has no molecular structure." You suggest he write to the Emperor about it. He declines. The jars you've collected today feel lighter, not metaphorically, physically. You weigh one and find it several ounces shy of standard. You try a second, same result, one raises an eyebrow. See less weight. Historians still debate whether laughter had any effect on early Han climate rituals. Most agree it's unlikely, but a few claim ceremonial performances were meant to trick the weather into better moods. You record your findings and your doubts. Joy snow may be lighter, but it's harder to hold. It likes to escape. At sunset, you visit the bridge again. This time, a boy proposes to a girl with a jar of snow instead of flowers. She laughs, accepts, and then sneezes into her sleeve. You take one last sample. You don't label it. You just smile. That night, you sleep with your feet tucked tight into the blankets, and you dream of snow, laughing not loudly, but quietly. The way a jar might laugh if it had a sense of humor and a warm shelf to rest on. You awaken slowly, as if time itself is being cautious today. The light filtering through the paper window is grey-blue, and the frost along the sill looks like someone tried to sketch clouds with a dull brush. You sit up and feel, rather than hear, the stillness. Something about the air says, today is different. A scroll is already waiting for you, placed carefully on your desk with a small stone to keep it from curling. It bears no seal, just a single line written in pale ink. Collect snow touched. By memory, you blink, then rub your eyes. It still says the dot when appears shortly after, carrying a satchel full of ink sticks and a very self-satisfied expression. Memory snow, he says, like it's a common phrase. This'll be fun. You ask him how one finds memory in snow. He shrugs. Wherever the past lingers longer than it should. Not helpful, but poetic. Typical when you begin the day. In the oldest part of town, the district that still bears the original cobblestones. Uneven and shin-high if you're not careful. Here, everything smells a little like dust, ash, and things that refuse to be forgotten. You pause near an abandoned shop front. A rusted wind chime hangs crooked from the eaves, swaying even though there's no wind. Snow rests in perfect piles beneath the overhang. You collect a sample, label it, Old Apothecary, Stillness. Next, the path behind the bathhouse, where your uncle once slipped and insisted it was a political metaphor. You smile at the thought. That spot always makes you pause. It does again now. The snow there feels ... heavier somehow. Slightly bluer. You jar it, seal it, and label it Memory. 2. Slippery commentary. When, meanwhile, is gathering snow from the base of the elm tree where the magistrate once lost his hat and dignity during a sudden storm. The locals still tell the story like it's a parable. He marks his jar, hat, incident, year of the goose. At midday, you stop by the temple archive, where the head monk, Brother Yu, offers you hot bean soup and a riddle. What remembers more, stone or snow? You don't answer. You don't need to. In the rear courtyard, near the prayer stones, a layer of snow lies perfectly undisturbed. You hesitate to touch it. It feels watched. But you gather a jar, hands respectful. No label this time. Some memories don't like names. Auntie Z finds you in the square, stares at your jars, and says quietly, "Memory is a snow that waits." Then she walks away before you can ask what that means, which of course means you'll be thinking about it for days. Back at the registry hall, Inspector Lee reviews your new entries with his usual squint. He stops at one marked bakery alley, smelled like father's coat. He doesn't comment, just taps it once, gently, and moves on. You write your notes by lamplight. Snow may not remember, but it listens well. Tonight, you place one of the jars near the window. You don't expect anything, but as you drift to sleep, the moonlight hits it just so, and for a moment, you swear you smell roasted chestnuts and old pine ink. The air is sharper today, not colder, just more precise, as if every breath is edited. You bundle up carefully, checking the seams of your robe for tiny betrayals of wind. Today's directive arrives late, carried by a courier with frost in his eyebrows and the unmistakable look of someone who regrets their career path. He hands you the scroll without words and walks away, muttering about toe circulation. You unroll the message. Collect snow shaped by absence. Of course, when arrives half an hour later, already grinning. Now we're getting philosophical. He's brought extra jars. Also, a small red flag for marking emotionally unstable collection zones, which is somehow both ridiculous and helpful. You begin near the town well, which has been dry for years. The snow gathered in its shadow forms oddly flat layers, as if unwilling to fall too deep. You scoop carefully, label well without. Next, the old road leading to the abandoned mill. No one travels it anymore, except wind and goats. Snow here gathers in thick, unspeaking drifts. You and Wen walk slowly, respectfully. You find a patch pressed into perfect stillness beneath an old wheel. It feels ... left behind, label. Absence 2, wheel without cart. Wen finds a patch of snow in the square where a bench used to be. The bench was removed after it cracked in half during a celebratory jumping contest, don't ask. Yet the shape remains an imprint in both snow and memory. He labels it Ghost Bench. You pause at the south wall of the temple, where once there was a small shrine. It was taken down for renovation, but no one ever rebuilt it. The space remains blank, snow-covered, and oddly clean. You stand there for a while, listening to nothing. Auntie Z joins you briefly and says, "Sometimes a place disappears louder than it arrived." She hands you a roasted yam again. It's perfect. You return to your desk that evening with 4 jars and a heart full of questions. You place the Ghost Bench sample beside your inkstone. It looks peaceful. Inspector Lee doesn't inspect. Today, he walks past you, murmurs something about space being more instructive than form, and disappears down the hall. You don't stop him when plays a soft note on the zither and says, "Absence isn't emptiness, it's a shape that never left." You record your notes in near silence. Snow shaped by what once was does not mourn, it waits. You fall asleep, thinking of all the jars that were never filled. And somehow, Those weigh the most. The morning arrives as if it forgot to set its own alarm. The light is dim, the kind that makes you question if it's morning at all, or just a particularly optimistic dusk. There's no scroll at your door. That alone is suspicious. You wait. Nothing. You light the brazier, warm your fingers, and begin nibbling at a leftover rice cake. Still nothing. And then just as you resign yourself to a scroll-free day, a boy from the palace arrives. He's not a courier, just a boy, probably lost a bet. He hands you the scroll, bows too quickly, and flees before you can ask anything. You open the scroll. This one is different. It has weight, literally. There's a jade pebble tied to the end, a symbolic nudge that says, "Read me slowly." The message is brief. Collect snow altered by dreams. You sigh, deeply. When shows up moments later, chewing on dried persimmon. And already halfway into an analysis. Dream altered snow. Oh, it's metaphorical, he insists. We're talking sleepwalking weather. Snow caught between the conscious and the not quite. You nod, mostly because there's no reason not to. You start at the healer's hut. She tells you that during winter, dream states are often thinner, as if the air can't quite hold them in. She suggests visiting places where people nap, so you do. Your first jar is filled outside the tea house, just beneath the window where a nap-prone scholar regularly slumps during mid-afternoon scroll readings. Today, he's mumbling something about rice quotas in his sleep. The snow outside his window has a strange ripple pattern. You scoop it, label, tea house, Das Quota murmurs. When insists on gathering a sample from outside the bathhouse, where people reportedly fall asleep mid-spit. You raise an eyebrow. He defends the logic with a shrug and a jar labeled Steam Dream Residue. In the garden behind the paper lantern shop, you find a snowdrift shaped uncannily like a sleeping cat. No footprints, no cat, just shape. You hesitate, then gently lift some snow into a jar. Label, Dream, 3 absentee feline, Auntie Z. Passers-by humming an old lullaby. She stops, points to a spot beneath the plum tree, and says, "My husband used to nap there every afternoon. He always dreamt of flying. There's snow there now, perfect, untouched." You gather it, label, Plum Nap Flight inclined. Back at your desk, the jars feel quieter than usual. Not silent, just tuned lower, like they're waiting for you to fall asleep before they do something interesting. Inspector Lee walks past, sniffs one, and says, "Smells like nonsense." You record his statement. Nonsense, like dreams, might just be early drafts of truth. When begins theorizing about the Emperor's dreams and whether these jars are attempts to contain or decode them, you let him talk while you write. Tonight, you sleep with one of the jars by your pillow. You dream of a snowstorm made of feathers, and somewhere in it, a goose is flying upside down. You wake up smiling, if slightly concerned. It snows again today. Not a heavy snow, not even a persistent one. Just little bursts, like the sky is clearing its throat. Your new scroll arrives, wrapped in deep green silk and tied with a thread the color of plum skin. You already know it's going to be weird. You are not disappointed. Collect the snow that does not want to be collected. You read it 3 times, then laugh once, out loud when doesn't even blink when you tell him. "Ah," he says. "Contrarian snow, you." Start your search at the southern ridge, where wind from the hills usually keeps the snow unsettled. Sure enough, as you try to scoop a small drift, it simply blows away, dispersing, like someone who's been spotted at a party they didn't want to attend. Label, Snow One Avoidant Personality. The market square is next. There's a patch there that keeps disappearing every time you look away. You try 3 times to collect it. The 3rd time, it's just gone. You collect from the stone edge instead. Label, Almost Snow. When discovers a strange spot behind the butcher's shop where the snow has compacted itself into a little pillar, just tall enough to tip over if touched. When he reaches for it, it collapses. Deliberately, it seems. He labels the jar Snow. With boundaries, Auntie Z walks past and says, "Snow that refuses." That's the wisest kind. Knows it's temporary. You try to collect snow from a cartwheel that keeps moving even when the cart isn't in use. Each time you reach for it, the wheel creaks just enough to smear the drift. Eventually, you just write, "Wheel refused." Understood. Back at the registry, Inspector Lee asks what today's collection is. When you tell him, he nearly chokes. On his tea, you're gathering snow that doesn't want to be gathered. You nod. He sighs the way a man sighs when he realizes his retirement will never come. Later that night, you sit at your window, watching a light flurry fall and vanish before it even hits the ground. You wonder, is all snow secretly resistant? Are the flakes you collect just too polite to object? You're right. Some snow disappears on contact. Others pretend not to notice, but all of it knows we're watching. You sleep without jars near your bed tonight. You give them space. It feels respectful. And outside, the snow continues. Soft, evasive, present on its own terms. Asterisk, the snow is slow today. Heavy, deliberate, as if each flake must pass a test before it can fall. You watch from your doorway, wrapped in 3 layers of linen and 1 layer of vague existential curiosity. The scroll arrives without a knock, just a soft thump, and when you open the door, it's there resting gently in a pile of snow that seems to cradle it like a tiny throne. The seal is gold today. That can't be a good sign. You open it, collect the final snow. You blink. That's it. No riddle, no poetic embellishment, no questionable metaphor. Just ... final. When arrives minutes later, bundled and solemn. "I got the same message," he says. "I don't know what it means. Neither do you. But you both know where to go." You start with the Emperor's Garden. Not the outer ring where most of your jars come from, but the inner sanctum, the part you've only heard about. The one with gates that rarely open and guards who rarely blink. Today, the gates open without a word. Inside, it's quiet. Too quiet. The snow here lies untouched, pristine, arranged in ways that seem impossible. Raked lines across white drifts, concentric circles around old stones, patterns that whisper, "Don't disturb me." You disturb them anyway. Gently, your first jar is filled from the center path, where a fox once walked and left perfect paw prints. You seal it, label, footsteps remembered. Further in, you find a stone basin filled with snow that glistens like frost on silver ink. You're not even sure it's real. Wen touches it and says, "It smells like endings." You take half. A jar, nothing more. Label, not forever, just finished. The final jar comes from beneath a crooked binder, one historians whisper about, supposedly planted by the first emperor of this dynasty, supposedly fed with ink from his own calligraphy brush. The snow beneath it is warm, not hot, not melting, just warm. You hesitate, then you fill the jar, slowly, reverently. Label, final. Wen doesn't speak. Neither do you. Not on the walk back. Not when you present the jars to the registry. Not when Inspector Lisalant for one's nods and bows. Just slightly, you return to your quarters. You light a small lantern. You place the final jar beside the first one you ever collected. Then you sit, quietly, and breathe. You do not record anything. Not tonight. Asterisk, asterisk, wind, dash down, asterisk. The room is dim now. The lantern flickers like it's telling a story only the shadows understand. Your breath is slow, and the air smells faintly of wood, smoke, old paper, and the last stretch of winter. You're surrounded by shelves. Clay jars, lined up like quiet witnesses. Some are chipped, others perfectly smooth. All of them filled with snow that has long since stopped falling, but somehow hasn't disappeared. You trace your finger along one. It's cool, still, unmoved. By time, yet never entirely still. You wonder, for the first time in a while, if maybe the snow has been watching you, too. If each jar you filled also filled something in you quiet corners. Old echoes, tiny questions that never quite demanded answers. Outside, the snow falls again. Just a whisper of it, barely there, like a lullaby meant only for rooftops. You sit, back against the wooden wall. The blanket is heavy over your legs. Your breath deepens. The wind taps the window once, then decides you're not worth waking. Somewhere nearby, a temple bell sounds once and does not echo. You remember the goose, you. Remember the boy who broke the jar and didn't cry. You remember the jar that hummed, the one that didn't want to be touched, the one that smelled like roasted chestnuts and forgotten stories. And now, you remember nothing in particular, just softness, just the feeling of your thoughts quieting, just the slow, inevitable melt into rest. Let your eyes close. Let your breath soften. Let the jars keep watch. You have carried snow, and snow has carried you. You've done enough. Good night.